this discussion is important because right now, when we look at what's happening, particularly in the African American community, and we look at COVID-19 and the effects of that, is and how the lungs of Black and brown people are already infected with so many things going on in our community. If it's the pollution, and if it's the air we're breathing, and also now there's a contamination that furthering with the COVID-19, and we want to look at a broad, the broad perspective here today, that we have to do something right now to create a better environment for Black and brown people in Los Angeles, particularly in Southern Los Angeles, that can breathe better. And so this is a start. This is a conversation about this. It's about how we can work together and come up with the resources and the programs that could better fix our communities. I was told, and I see from the earlier looking around who's on this call, that there are important people on this call, both on the community side. We have some presidents of presidents of state Baptist conventions, a president of the LA Baptist Convention. We have ministers and clergy for Black Lives Matter, and we all are coming together because we want to fix a solution here. And even electrification is not always the only answer. We have to deal with some systemic problems and how we're going to fix that. And I think this is a first start of something that we can do we can build on and move together. So thank you. We also have some outstanding African-American female preachers on board with us today. Also, must acknowledge our sisters, and particularly because one of them is my wife, and to make sure that, all together, you'll hear from a lot of them during the questioning and answers process. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Pastor Smart. Next, we're very fortunate in California for many things, despite what we see on the news sometimes in the past couple of weeks, but we were tremendously fortunate to have a leader in Governor Newsom who has the team, has the expertise, has the values, has the heart, and has the understanding that this needs to happen on a community level, and very pragmatic. So really excited to have the leadership of Governor Newsom. And today with us, we have someone from his senior staff. So Eric DeCock is with his Office of Planning and Research, and is really taking the lead on environmental justice guidelines. So Eric, I really want to thank you for all of the work that you're doing on behalf of the governor up in Sacramento, but also having this dialogue with us. As we talked about, if things are just happening up in the Horseshoe and these conversations aren't happening, those pieces of legislation tend to not either work or not be adopted. So I wanted to turn it over to you for just a second.
Thanks, Tamara. Thank you, Pastor Smart, and everyone at the Health Air Alliance for inviting me to have this conversation today. You're doing so much at the state level right now. Just to know the governor is so busy with dealing with the pandemic, but we haven't forgotten about environmental justice. And our office, in particular, the governor's Office of Planning and Research, is basically the state's arm for coordinating land use, planning, and environmental policy activities and climate policy around state agencies. So we focus on land use, environmental policy, and review. We do have a coordination role in the California Environmental Review Act, or CEQA, as many of you know it, as well as housing, transportation, and climate legislation and environmental justice legislation that's going forward. In this work, we do have a strong commitment to environmental justice, promoting equitable, just, and sustainable communities in the long term, as well as meeting the needs of the present. One of the things that we just did very recently is release updated general plan guidance for promoting, and there's some new requirements because of the California Senate Bill SB 1000 that was passed in 2016 that specifically required local governments to integrate environmental justice into their planning when they contain under-resourced or what's defined in state law as disadvantaged communities. So that's looking at reducing air pollution exposure in impacted communities. There's a linkage there with the AB 617 program that the California Air Resources Board launched a year or two ago. I noted that some of the South Coast Air District folks are on the call today, so I'm sure they'll have some things to say about that. But there are critical linkages in what local governments must now do through land use in engaging their communities and having these conversations on how land use patterns, inequitable decisions about land uses, polluting land uses, and then the cars, trucks, and ships and ports and everything that leads to air pollution, how the land use and transportation infrastructure investment decisions over our history have led to inequitable and disparate and health incomes that disproportionately place burdens on people of color. So this is what this new guidance is all about. We do not implement the guidance. It's actually implemented locally through local governments, through their planning for general plans, through zoning, and through infrastructure investments, and the sort of programs and policies that implement the general plan. The general plan sort of acts as a constitution. So we've recently released updated guidance in June of this year. It reflects a few years of input from our sister agencies, the California Environmental Protection Agency, the Air Resources Board, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard and Assessment, or OEHA. Some folks on the room may know about the CalEnviroScreen screening tool that's been foundational in understanding who's most disadvantaged and impacted by pollution in California. So there's key inputs and how those tools can be used in this new guidance. So just know that we are actively promoting this new guidance now. We just did a great webinar yesterday. We had over 500 planners, folks in the planning practice in California on that webinar, and we were very excited to just see a rich array of questions on how to implement that guidance. So just know that we're working hard on getting that out and trying to have a better outcomes in local planning and implementation in California.
Thank you, Eric. That's fantastic, and a perfect segue to our next speaker, Fabian Wesson. If you know anything about Los Angeles, you'll know that she is the heart of our city down here. She's also the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer and Public Advisor for the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And she does really, really amazing work there, building partnerships between AQMD and communities just like this. So Fabian, do you want to say a couple words?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And Pastor Smart, thank you for convening this gathering of illustrious people. I'm honored to be here, and this is a very much needed conversation. Just to briefly give you a history about South Coast QMD, we have a 4-county jurisdiction, including all of Orange County and the major portions of Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. So we have like 17 million people that are under our purview that we work to help keep clean the air for. Almost an impossible job, but we're doing the best that we can. Now, on top of that, I also have the honor of managing the Environmental Justice Program and the AB 617 program out at South Coast. We have, I would say, arguably the most robust environmental justice program that ties hand in hand, as the Governor Eric said. Governor Eric, doesn't that sound good? As the governor's rep said, AB 617 communities tend to be environmental justice communities, so they tie hand in hand. With our environmental justice program, for years, we've been in these communities doing workshops, offering incentive programs such as our Replace Your Ride, where you can turn in your car that's 8 years or older, emitting harmful emissions, and get a brand new car. You just have to meet the income requirements, local requirements as far as where you live, and you have to live in our jurisdiction, and you can get a new car, or a used car for almost free. We offer up to a $9,500 voucher for that, and that can be used in other state programs in conjunction with. We have replacement programs for lawnmowers and garden tools that are run by gas. We can help you with those costs. I also manage a small business assistance program that helps small businesses in disadvantaged communities and across our jurisdiction with issues with their permits and just small business technical problems that they have. We address all those issues also. So we're quite involved in the community. Environmental justice is quite important to us. We have several programs underneath that umbrella, including elementary program where we go into the elementary schools. We do assemblies with the kids. Now that we're doing virtual distance learning, we're now converting that program to be virtual. We have a high school program called the WHAM program where we go into, and again, they tend to be AB 617 and EJ communities, go into high schools to teach the kids about high school, to teach the kids about air quality and things that they can do. We also have a personal air monitoring component to that program, where kids can learn how to monitor the air. South Coast has a phone application where you can download on your phone and check air quality in real time on a daily basis, especially crucial to seniors and young children and people that have respiratory ailments. So that's something you might want to download. It's our South Coast AQMD phone app, also available on our website. So we're constantly in the community doing things to try to help the community and work with the community and helping us clean the air. Trying to think of all the other programs. We have an environmental justice advisory group. Am I out of time? You guys can stop me anytime, because I can talk about South Coast all day. Because it's not a job. Understand, it's not a job to me. What we do is we literally save lives. We save lives and we make lives better by making it easier to breathe. So for me, it's a mission. And I can talk about this all day. We've got several environmental justice programs where we go out into the communities. We have an advisory group, environmental justice advisory group, that's made up of community members that advises our board on issues. I just met with Young Leaders Advisory Group yesterday, composed of 20 young people between the ages of 18 to 30. They give us their perspective on issues in their neighborhoods. We have one kid that's running for city council. Yesterday we had a listening session on the current issues of inclusion, diversity, and equity. And we just listened to these young people talk about their ideas and their feelings on racial issues and intersectionality and connectivity within communities. So we're out there in the communities. We're not just regulating air. We're out there working with the communities.
Sister, I don't want to interrupt. I know you got to
stop.
No, but no, I was going to say, Miss Hamar will allow me to ask you a question here. I know we got. I was not aware of, and I'm sure some of the other community pastors and clergy was not aware of some of those programs that AQMD, South Coast Air Quality Management has. And so what we would really want to do going forward is really set up some type of summit or like this, where you can explain that we could have more community involved, because some of those are some valuable resources that we see can be used to really attenuate the negative air flow into our community. Reimbursements for gas blowers and things like that. There's a lot of things Black and brown people need to know that you're doing. Thank you.
I agree with that. Thank you. And we are at your disposal. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I didn't know about that phone app, so I live down by the port, so it's especially important for me. So thank you. Next, I wanted to go, we have two more introductory speakers, and then we'll open it up to some dialogue and questions. So as you all out there are thinking about questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask, or just feel free to type it into the chat, whatever is more convenient for you. So next up, again, this is all centered in health at the end of the day. So we have Dan Witzling, who is the Executive Director of the American Cancer Society for Los Angeles and the Central Coast. Dan, we're talking so much these days also about, lung health and everything else. Obviously, these are longstanding issues. Can you give us an update on sort of where ACS is now and where the science of health is on these issues?
And just to be sure, I'm attempting to share a screen.
Yep, got it.
Okay, and seeing if I can kick it into, there we go. All right, well, thank you, and thank you all. So absolutely, and I appreciate the opportunity to be speaking with everyone today. America is the sum of many parts. Cancer is the sum of many diseases, and society and the diversity is really where we are today as a top priority. We've seen some steady declines in cancer rates overall over the past 50 years, and that has really been to the testament of a lot of research, a lot of advances, and cleaner air, healthier lifestyles, and a whole lot of proactive steps that have taken place. But what we also see is that cancer rates have not necessarily declined for everyone. And primarily what we look at the American Cancer Society are mortality rates. We do the best we can. There are few, if any, cures to cancer. However, there's a lot of ways that we are looking to treat the symptoms, deal with early detection, and just have people live high quality lives, similar to what Fabian was sharing about, strengthening the resolve of people living in communities. So when people think about pollution, often they think about diesel, and comes to mind lung cancer. So I wanted to share briefly just a few images of different types of cancers, and then talk about some of the risk factors. But what I also want to talk about real briefly, there's what we can do about where we live, and then there's the reality that we're living there right now. And so when we're talking to communities, we're working with NAACP in Long Beach very specifically, and we're working with different groups, LGBTQI groups in West Hollywood. We're trying to be very specific about what are specific barriers, health equity barriers, other barriers that might be in the way of what we see are the most important priorities in terms of health, advancing prevention, early detection, and ensuring people have equal access to health services and treatment. Some of this absolutely relates to political movements, advocacy at all levels, but some of it is also personal empowerment. We live where we live. When I'm a runner, when I had a daughter growing up, thinking about if I'm running with one of those jogging strollers, I'm fine, I'm fit, but my daughter is a vulnerable population. I don't know if the air that she's breathing is helping her or hurting her. And that was scary to me, not necessarily having the science behind it. We look at the example of Carmageddon in about 2012, and UCLA did a study, the 405, it was a 10-mile stretch, and they saw that the air quality was 83% better just because of that time that they closed the freeway down a little bit. We see the similar types of studies happening right now. One of the consequences of COVID, less people on the road, at least in March and April. There's a lot of data. What we're looking at right now on the screen, for those of you that are able to see it, this is also relatively new information. The type of data that we can have at a granular level, this is about at most 3 years old. The type of data that we were looking at in the health industries prior to this has mostly been at the county level, which for a lot of the country is still just fine. But Los Angeles County is bigger than population density wise than 42 states. It's just not good enough. It doesn't tell us really the story of what's going on. And so we're asking the questions right now with you. Where do you live and what is your risk? We know to be true that zip code is more important than genetic code in terms of cancer risk. So we are doing everything in our power to try to help people live healthy lives. And really, so let's just look a minute at what we're seeing at the screen, and then I'll show you just a little bit more beyond that. You can clearly see that in the Long Beach area, we're kind of comparing just diesel exposure on the right to cancer rates on the left. So some of this is probably intuitive, but yes, the darker shades, the purple, really do show that along the coastal areas where our goods movement is arriving and going to the rest of the country, there are higher rates of lung cancer. Is this caused by the pollution? To some extent, probably. There are some researchers that believe that about 5% of lung cancer could be caused by diesel emissions. Is 5% a high number? It really doesn't matter when you're living in a high density community, because that's 5 kids out of 100 kids that could be at risk. Some of the new data that we do know, and that we'll talk about, we can say with absolute certainty that cancer rates, mortality rates are definitely increased by people living in corridors with transportation. So let's just look at another cancer. This is liver cancer. So now we're looking at cancers. I could have shown you colon cancer as well. Similarly, what we're ingesting absolutely is affecting us as a higher rate. Just to kind of compare real quick, look how much higher the liver cancer rates, and the same is true with colon cancer than lung cancer. And you can almost just imagine that the 110 freeway, the 710, following this purple track on the left side. and going into parts east and parts north. There's definitely something happening. And so not only do we want to have the evidence, which is why I'm working with a lot of experts at universities, working with AQMD and others, but we want to get information like this out so people can know in their neighborhood, what are my risks? But more than that, we want people to feel, not totally, I'm in an area, there's nothing I can do, and I'm just, I'm a martyr for the cause because of where I live. My zip code will define my health outcomes, and there must be something we can do to affect that. So looking here at some of the disparities, what we also see and what we know to be true, it's not just the pollution, but certainly, and there's some, we were talking about real estate costs earlier, there are some other implications if there are poor communities living in areas of high pollution. Access to food, nutrition is also a main factor. We know that obesity next to smoking is the second highest leading cause of cancer that we can impose upon ourselves. So there's a lot of factors at stake here. And what we're trying to do is sort through, on one hand, the evidence that will help us to guide policy. But what we want to do, and why we're reaching out to very targeted communities, is talk about, all right, well, what can we do today? What are the areas that we need to improve upon in terms of prevention? Can we work towards healthy eating, active lifestyles? What are the risk factors of being outdoors and exercise? Is there a way that the Cancer Society can help with better access to food in areas? Are there other ways that we can help people get access to treatment? If there's gaps in health insurance, so that people don't feel that they have the ability to get the type of prevention, because prevention is key. We know increasingly that with early detection, you can prevent as many as 30% or higher of any cancer. So even if you lived a lifestyle that not necessarily was a healthy one, you could still go to the doctor and get checked for lung cancer or breast cancer or other colon cancer or other significant cancers, and treat them early and live a well life. There's a lot of risks at stake. We know that we're living in a very complex society. So we're just very proud to be part of this coalition. I'm a board member with the Healthy Air Alliance now. Grateful to be a member with you. We're going to do everything we can, and we are basically, we are a movement of people across the country. We are neighborhood by neighborhood of people that acted up and stood up and said, what's happening in hospitals is just not enough, because healthcare exists in community, and that's where we need to be. So the American Cancer Society is trying our best to be a part of that. And if there are areas where you do not see our presence or not receiving any resources, please do reach out, because we will work with whoever is willing to reach out. We're very proud to be partnering and supporting anything we can with AB 617, with AQMD, and we are an organization that exists locally but across the country. So really looking forward and proud to be here today. Thank you.
Dan, thank you so much. That's really helpful. I live in one of those purple districts on Lund Hill, so thank you so much for making sure that I get to stay safe along with my neighbors. We've got a really special guest today, Kip Lipper, who I'm sure many folks know, have known over the years. Kip, thank you so much. I know that you are busy, crafting the environmental policies of the state, and have come a really, which have come a long way and gotten much better, thanks in very large part to your leadership. So can you give us a view of where we are and what's next and what's on the horizon for the state of California from a policy level, and then what we here on a community level can do to partner, advocate, and support and spread the word?
Yeah, thank you very much. You're really, I want to say a couple things. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I don't get to speak to these kinds of groups and the people that are on here. Reverend, it's good to see you. I can tell you, I've worked in the legislature for 45 years, and I was really impressed with Fabian Wesson's comments. The name, you guys may not know this, but the name Wesson in my world is quite well known. I think someone she might be related to was the Speaker of the Assembly when some of the landmark climate and clean air legislation passed not too many years ago. And so I was really impressed to hear her presentation. Also, our colleague at OPR, the Office of Planning and Research, good to see you there. They and Governor Newsom are doing pretty amazing work. I work for the legislative branch, so when you hear Fabian talk about AB 617 or environmental justice, or when you hear others, my friend at OPR talk about the general plan guidelines and those kinds of things, much of that is born and put into motion by legislation, by laws that are passed by the legislature. AB 617 is an assembly bill. It was a bill that was passed in 2017, and it was passed for a very important reason that you all need to understand. California is very focused on different kinds of pollution, and the kinds of pollution that we're talking about to some extent, and the gentleman who just made the presentation regarding cancer is talking about, is oftentimes referred to as criteria pollution, criteria pollutants. These are clean air pollutants that clog the lungs and make people sick, cause health effects, have economic effects because kids miss school, they develop asthma, and those kinds of things. So think of the smog and the localized pollution that you deal with every day in your lives if you're living in a community that's near freeways or near heavy industrial sites. California also has a law that deals with climate pollution. Climate pollution is principally carbon dioxide, and that is not a criteria pollutant per se. It is a pollutant that's regulated under the Federal Clean Air Act, but it's more heat trapping gas that goes up into the atmosphere and causes climate change. And one of the central tenets of California's climate policy has been, not to make it an either or. In other words, let's save the planet, but then let's let our communities get polluted and harmed. We want to both. We want to do both. And Fabian did a great job of talking about what the South Coast is doing, and we have programs like that all over the state. And AB 617 was focused on saying, wait a minute, it might be great to save the rainforest in South America. It might be wonderful to make sure that the polar ice caps don't melt. Those are really important, critical issues in the climate change firmament. But in the meantime, if poor kids and people of color are being harmed by the pollution in their streets and in their neighborhoods, in their local communities, that's something we need to focus on too. And this is I just want to tell you guys, this is a big tension in my world, and I'm sure Ms. Wesson deals with it as well in her job, and I know OPR deals with it, which is, a lot of the activities of society cause immediate public health and environmental harms to, people, particularly younger people, particularly people of color, particularly elderly people. And they often get left behind in these discussions because we're so busy talking about how to save the planet and do other kinds of things that we don't think about two things. One is the immediate real world health effects on them. And two is the cost. Okay, if a person in South LA is paying more of their electric utility bill or a higher cost for their transportation because they are in a disadvantaged community or in an environmental justice area, that is an impact on them. And that's an impact every bit as real on their pocketbooks and their daily lives as some of the other issues that they are dealing with. And so this is a complicated area of law and policy that we work in. And I just want to say two things. One is thank you guys for doing this, because I never, I go to a lot of lofty conferences with a lot of academic experts and a lot of analysis of what the mean temperature for the Earth's warming should be and things like that. And talking to you guys, it's like talking to real people in the real world who are dealing with real issues and thinking about like, okay, if we have a bad smog day tomorrow, there's going to be 200 or 300 more people in LA area hospitals and having health impacts that need to be addressed right on top of COVID and all the other things that are going on. So these are really important issues you guys are talking about, and I want to compliment you. And I feel a little in a weird place because you have such impressive people who are reverend. It's good to see you, and you have these people who are really committed to these issues and working on them. And all of this is so immediate and important in our world today with all that's going on. And what I would tell you is, my job in the legislature is to write the laws and to work on appropriating the monies. So for example, the reference to AB 617 or the incentive funds to get rid of high polluting, household lawnmowers and things like that, and to replace them with zero polluting devices, or incentives, particularly for people in disadvantaged communities to be able to buy the same electric cars or hybrid vehicles or other kinds of things that other segments of society can better afford. Those are the kinds of things that I work on. I work on trying to find money, revenue sources, and mechanisms to ensure that California's environmental programs don't just serve people who are well off and who have the luxury of being able to join the Sierra Club or something like that. They serve the communities that many of you work in and represent. And so I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. I'd rather not talk a lot and take questions, but I'm very grateful to be here today. And I just want to say thanks again for the outstanding presentations of your speakers.
Thank you so much, Kip, and you're welcome back anytime. We're all excited to have you, and it's always this fun, always this warm. So get out of the conference rooms and come hang out with us. Pastor Smart, I wanna go back to you to kind of center us in this moment that we're in right now. It's been a busy 2020 so far. We've got a deadly pandemic, which is especially burdensome on with tremendous disparities along racial lines for communities of color. We've got really extreme exposure to environmental hazards that have made us more susceptible to that pandemic, right? So those issues that Dan was talking about are making us even more at risk. On top of that, we're bearing the brunt of the economic downturn. A lot of us are those essential workers that are keeping the economy going at tremendous personal risk. And then on top of that, we've got the scourge of police brutality with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many other names. And we're only halfway through the year. So you spearheaded this discussion today. And thank you for doing that. Can you tell us why this conversation is so important right now?
Well, when I was in college, I learned a word in sociology called concomitant variations, and that was that everything is related together, and we can tie environmental policy, early environmental policy, and housing patterns, and all to white supremacy. And when you tie it to that, a way people design things to really cut out the poor, the disadvantaged, the Black and brown people, and you begin to see that so housing where they live, the development of a lot of brown housing down by the ports, the basin, the basin where the environmental quality is the worst. All of that fits together. And when you talk about then a police force comes in town to make sure everybody stays in place. Everyone acts according to how supremacy put it in place. And when you look at it that way, and then you begin to say, okay, how can there be something? That's how to me, it all relates together. And so moving forward, we wanted a conversation about moving forward. I have some very serious people on this call who are concerned about the whole picture. And so environmental racism, we know has been around for a long time. And how do we begin to address these? Because in the basin and also in California, from my work at the ports, it is one of the most densely populated places for people of color, and at the same time one of the most highly, as the map show, one of the most highly polluted places. And so how do we begin to fix that? That's what I wanted to have a conversation, but then pushing it a little further to say, this is some of the action steps, or how we can move to some real action steps. I have one friend on this call for a while that when you talked about intersectionality, that is his word. That is his word. And so, how do we fit it all together? That's been a concern. When we talk about COVID, why is it of the 100,000 people in America that have COVID, 84 are white, 222 are African American, 265, this is the latest from CDC, 265 are brown. So of that, it's disproportionately affecting Black and brown people. Why? Because our lungs are stopped up, because of the history of poor health, access to health. All of that plays a part in it. Was that helpful?
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. Thank you so much. And I'm so heartened by the advocacy of folks from our community, really led by faith leaders and other advocates, especially young people now. insisting that environmental justice fits squarely in a national legacy of systemic racism. And Kip, you've been doing this work for a long time. That is a reality that has not always been true when we're talking about environmental policy, right? There's been a reluctance to acknowledge that. Is that a change that you're seeing more now, and what does that difference look like?
Yes, I think a couple things. One is, and again, I hope you'll forgive me, but I in the 1990s, I worked with a young woman, a young Latina from El Monte, who was an assembly member at the time. And she, came to, I was a staff person for one of the committees, and she said, I live in El Monte, and there are 4 freeways that cross each other in my community. There are gravel pits where they're mining gravel in Azusa and in the communities adjacent to that. And there's all the pollution that blows in from downtown LA and from all the other sources of pollution. And, the people in my community, as the pastor said, they're getting sick and they're dying. This is not just kind of over the next 65 years, one person out of 100,000 might get cancer. These are people who have, congestive heart failure. They have lung conditions. They have asthma. They have, honestly, and I thought the pastor did a really good job of mentioning this. They, when we talk about COVID and we say, well, the high risk groups tend to be people who have other, maladies associated with their health. That's a lot of the stuff that we see. So this young woman, legislator, said, I want to write a bill, and we came up with this term. We didn't invent it. I know it was out there, but for the first time in 1993 or 94. The words environmental justice appeared in the law books of the state of California. And that woman was Hilda Solis, who went on to be elected to the state Senate. She got the award from the John F. Kennedy Foundation for Courage for this fight. And you all know her. She's a fixture of Los Angeles politics and has been around for many years now. But so, that's, to me, I think back from when environmental policy and public health policy really sort of started moving into not just being the domain of medical groups and of the pediatricians and the environmental groups that we all know about. It was more like, wait a minute, these are communities that are being affected, and true environmental policy is environmentally just policy. Just like any true socially just program takes into account all communities and not just some communities. So what I would tell you is, there have been great victories, like the passage of the first environmental justice bill, like the passage of AB 617 that we were talking about earlier. The challenge has been getting money and attention to these communities, because you all know this, and I forgive me, because I work for some really wonderful elected officials, but elected officials tend to say, oh, I passed a law and now I fixed the problem. And really the work begins once the law is passed, to actually make that law work in the real world where you all live and where your communities are, to fix that problem. And so what I would say is, it's a constant challenge. And I do think, as Pastor said, the attention that's been brought to these issues by Black Lives Matter, ironically and sadly, and his citing of the statistics about COVID and who it affects, that is front and center to me, the exhibit that needs to be presented about who's really being harmed by these things. But we also know, and I mean, it's no secret, as the presenter did earlier on cancer clusters and that sort of thing, it's no secret that the communities you all represent and the people with whom you work, whether it's air pollution, whether it's water pollution, whether it's toxic materials, it's your communities that bear the brunt of that stuff. There's not a whole lot of landfills and other kinds of facilities located in communities like Beverly Hills or San Marino. Let's be honest. It's the communities that go down the I-710 corridor and in many of the 110 corridor that bear the brunt of a lot of these issues. And so this is a constant. This is not something where you can rest for a minute. We need to stay at it. We need to make sure that the money is there. We need to make sure the attention is there. And while we have some very good and strong laws on the books, and frankly, thanks to you all, we've elected good legislators who have come here and done very good work, committed to your communities. The California legislature, as you all know, is a very diverse body, and the views of the African American caucus, of the Latino caucus, and of the other caucuses are very important to our members. And so the good news is we're making progress. The bad news is the progress is very slow. and oftentimes goes backwards, particularly when you have these economic disruptions or, this once in a generation phenomena like COVID. But I do think I have a lot of hope and optimism. And like I said, the part of what energizes me and makes me feel good is seeing you all and the work that you're doing and the push that you're making. Because like I said, I spend a lot of time with people who talk about these issues, but a lot of it's theoretical, a lot of it's based on scientific models and stuff like that. It's all very important. That's important work, but it is not the same as making sure that the people in the communities that you represent are being taken care of. So that's my quick summary.
Tamara, I just want to follow up on that real quick. Kip, first of all, Kip's being very, very modest. The AB 617 program, Kip is very heavily responsible for making certain that we were refunded this year, because we were not going to be. And we still only got the same amount of money that we got last year with more communities to work with. So the same amount of money we got last year for 3 communities. South Coast now has 5 communities that we have to do the same amount of work with 2 more communities. So Kip, from the bottom of my heart, because I take this personally, thank you for the work that you've done in that. But he's right. How do we keep it from stopping when the economic downturns come, when the attention stops focusing on Black Lives Matter? Because it will, after a while. I've lived through this, it will. It's up to this group here. It's up to us to make certain that it does not stop. It's up to us to ban. There's so much synergy in this group going on right here. It's up to us to make certain that it does not stop, because it's the people. It's the people that count. And if we work with the people, which we do, if we work with the people, then we can make this happen. Thank you for allowing me that. Thank you. And thank you, Kip.
Thank you both. Yeah, and Fabian, that was just what I was going to ask you. When you're implementing on the ground, AQMD has been, over the past couple of decades, so insistent on bringing the community with you and also letting the community push you, right? Rather than coming from a fearful and defensive place, actually welcoming that. Before we go on, Fabian, do you want to talk about maybe just your experience of how critical the community and especially the faith community is in saying just what you said? Our communities, our congregants need more. We deserve better.
Can we do, before you do that, can we open up the chat? Some people want to make sure they chat.
Absolutely. We've got, as people are typing in questions, Fabian, James Thomas has a question right next, so he knows he's speaking next. So Fabian, go ahead, and then we'll go over to James.
Okay, well, we've always valued our partnerships with the faith-based community. It's important. We understand it's not necessarily sometimes what you say, it's who says it. And we understand that the pastors and the faith leaders have the trust and faith of their congregants and their communities. And we understand historically the church has been where you get your information, where you get your political information, where you get your information about what's happening in the communities, and your pastors have delivered it. So you already have the trust that's so necessary to build in these communities, because without trust, you can't help. You can't help them, because the defenses, the barriers come up, because for so long they've been beat down and they've had no voice and nobody has listened to them. Kip, you were talking about Hilda Solis in 91. Dr. William Burke started our environmental justice program in 1987 out at South Coast.
There you go.
Yes. So we've been delving with this for a long, long time, which is why we were able to successfully go into the communities with AB 617 and get the information. I was looking at the maps that Dan had out. We would go into the communities and give folks these maps and say, okay, we know through monitoring what the problems are, but what are your priorities? What are your concerns? What's most important to you for us to come in and lower the emissions? What's important to you? So that community-led and community-driven give and take increased the trust that we had already developed. And having worked with the community, giving them voice to say, it's not okay that I live near a rendering plant and my kid, have you guys know what a rendering plant is? and that my kids can't go outside and play at recess because they can't smell the air. Well, we successfully had those enclosed. COVID-19 came, and it's costing a lot of money for them to do it, but we had those successfully enclosed so that those kids could come out and play. I went to one and couldn't almost get off the bus, but I forced myself, because if people can live in this, I can at least breathe it for a few moments and have that sympathy. So no, it's important. We've done events in the past with with the faith-based community. We've been in Orange County, we've been in Los Angeles. We were planning an event in Riverside County, and then COVID-19 came. So now that's being turned to virtual, because with virtual, you can reach even more. Folks that can't travel can now click in on their phones. They can now click in on their computers and get that kind of information that we want to give them. We want to continue these partnerships with the faith-based. We see the opportunity to come into now that we're on the screen, we can come into your communities on a regular basis and give out this information about the incentive programs that we have and what they can do, and advise them on their small businesses. It just increases our visibility and our opportunities to be able to help. So how can you help us? You know, all of us living in Southern California are breathing bad air. We know that. And we know that the poor air quality affects our health. Dan showed us that. And all of the kind of diseases that it causes. So you can help by just sharing the information with your congregations, letting them know that they are responsible too for helping us clean the air. There's simple things that they can do. Stop the idling of their cars when they're waiting for someone, or they're going to pick someone up. Turn that car off so that those emissions are not going. Just having awareness about the air pollution is part of the battle. You know, all of our website has continual information on there. We're even talking about putting virtual classes on our website to inform people about education and air quality. So we're really willing to work with you guys at every opportunity. Whenever you want us to come out and do a meeting, we can do that. So we understand the importance of the faith congregation.
Thank you so much. We have a raised hand from someone in the audience. Mr. Thomas, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah.
Hi, James.
Hello, how are you all doing? I certainly appreciate the work that you're doing. But I want to ask a question. Now, what is foundational to all of this, I think, is poverty.
Absolutely.
And and so there's been some discussions about money and funding, and I'm just wondering, it would seem to me that there ought to be a way. Back in I think back in 2013, I think it was, there was an effort to involve people in the community in solar paneling work. The quote unquote clean industry. And quite frankly, I never really heard about the scores of Black folks from South LA who were hired under the auspices of that program, even though, the mayor had pushed the legislation. And so I think what is important in terms of getting the word out, I think the best way to get the word out is that people who live in these areas are actually employed to do this work. I think that's that's a magnificent way. And so when we talk about, the funding that's going forward, I know that there are organizations that have had a long history in doing this work, but how much of this funding can be redirected to these communities to fight some of the poverty that produces, because I think it's not just the physiological damage done by pollution, but there's also a psychological damage that's done that happens, and I think it's very, very much related to poverty. So I'm just wondering how more people in the community can be involved in that. Are these discussions? I saw the poverty map, so I know that from the Cancer Association standpoint, that is an issue that's being discussed. But I'm wondering, from a legislative standpoint, how seriously is that being explored?
Yeah, I'll ask our Sacramento folks and Dan as well about all those issues that Mr. Thomas just raised. So Eric, Dan, or Kip, any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. One of the things that OPR has done over the last 10 years in partnership with our sister agency, the California Strategic Growth Council, is really centered equity and justice in the way that we've created grant programs that are responsive to some of those investment needs in disadvantaged communities. So we have numerous programs such as the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program that sort of pairs affordable housing and sustainable investments in those projects. We also have the Transformative Climate Community, which is a unique program that looks at the holistic needs around addressing climate inequities and equities in investments. So that can include, and has included in numerous of the projects, clean energy investments that give job opportunities to folks. Of course, as someone said earlier on this webinar, it's only the tip of the iceberg. It's not enough. We need to keep doing this. You know, we're looking at 1.5 billion over the last 8 years for the California climate investment programs in our portfolio, and we're just one of many agencies. So we need to continue in promoting those programs and looking at the economic development component, addressing the systemic inequities and how clean energy dollars are invested. So great comment, and hopefully that helps at least partially address some of those concerns.
And just to share a couple different perspectives on that, I think certainly, health is one of the biggest cost factors in looking at poverty, especially at the uninsured populations. And what can we do to improve, healthcare for all, just improving healthcare access, because it doesn't take long for the bills to pile up, especially for any chronic disease. People living with disease can have untold and unanticipated expenses that show up at any time. And we see constantly people that start from very stable situations, and maybe they're employed through their or getting the help through their work, and then they're not, or certain occupations that don't provide that type of health care. And so there's a lot that can be done on the legislative front to really look at closing the gaps so that kind of that easy fall into poverty wouldn't happen. Another thing I just wanted to also add, when we look at health equity, we also look at diversity and leadership. There is some legislation, and there's just the realities of who are the doctors, who are the leaders of any industry. Do they represent when today's youth are looking, are they seeing people that they can grow up and emulate? And Fabian kind of mentioned this as well a couple of times. You have to identify and see that you could be someone, whether it's women historically not seeing that they could really have elevated roles, in the medical professions or others. And so, we from the Cancer Society, on a non-legislative side, we focus a lot on diversity of leadership and education. We want, important STEM and STEAM education happening at a youth level, so that people can see that I can grow up and make choices in my life. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to work in the health profession, but the type of critical thinking involved that we're helping to establish through partners at a young age will help them later in life to anywhere they want to be. So these are, trying to just figure out what are the pathways, and then what are the roadblocks that are being put in front of people that are causing financial distress. So we absolutely empathize with kind of what you're talking about, and agree with you that it just becomes this impossible cycle of poverty. Especially when you're in areas where you're compounded by all these different factors working against you.
Thank you so much. We've got a couple questions from our participants. We have Pastor Salz and then Pastor Anderson next. So Dr. Salz, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, thank you. This is certainly good to be a part of this. I think we all know that health inequity is a matter of national security. And one piece that certainly influences health is, what we breathe in. And so the phrase, I can breathe, is not just a phrase, that we can apply to what's happening around police brutality right now, but it's one that has been going on for a long time, since, Benjamin Chavis and the group out of North Carolina coined the phrase environmental racism. Now that continues, and it just seems in so many ways that the response to that continues to be one of reaction, and the reaction always is funding for programs to intervene. I think my question is a question around prevention, because I think, prevention in so many ways, can have, a long-term sustainable impact. And prevention has to do with policy and not just programs. I think as a person of faith, and not just, a Black person here in the United States, but environmental racism is a global challenge for Black folk all over the world, just to let you know that. But my question is, how do we, facilitate a disposition of prevention, instead of just, one of intervention, and how is the agency working towards that? And I say that because when I was at home in UMC, we were just down the street, from an active, neighborhood oil drilling well that was connected with 3 or 4 other wells, in the community, crossing districts, and so we've just, realized that from West Adams to Wilmington to Kern County, to Sacramento, there's just the ongoing reaction, by way of intervention, but folk are not that excited around the prevention by way of policy. So I'd like to know, how do we, move in that direction, or continue to move in that direction, so that we can see some systemic change, and not just, depend on the charity from corporations, around an intervention approach.
Yeah, any of our speakers want to jump in on that one? That's such a great question. Dan,
I'm
think
happy to speak up if you want me to.
Yeah, Dan, that would be great. I think this is a lot of, or Kip, either one, please.
Did you want me to talk?
Yeah, sure, go for it. Yeah, thank you.
No, I don't want to interrupt. I mean, this is such a great, the wonderful thing about this is I want to listen. I don't want to talk. And the comments by the pastors and this is a really good dialogue. And I just want to say on the prevention front, I'm not an expert on that issue per se, but I do think a lot of what we try to do, and maybe Eric at OPR can comment on this as well. I do think, a lot of this is looking at, people and communities, not as if like there's only air pollution, or there's only water pollution, or there's only, food deserts, or there's only communities that are economically disadvantaged. It's all of those elements and more that are part of this equation. And so it takes, and I wanted to go back to something that you were talking about earlier and that Fabian was so articulate on, the faith community and the people on this call and today are critically important for what she said, which is, this is not environmental advocacy per se. This is the faith community and the people that they speak to and represent coming forward. And that is a different voice in Sacramento than you typically get on these issues. The South Coast Air District does a fabulous job. They have, they come up here, I meet regularly with the district staff on issues, but they're the regulators. They're the guys trying to clean up the air down there. They're an incredibly important part of it, but having the voice of the faith community in this, I think is both unique and absolutely critical. It's different than any other voice at the table. And then on prevention, all I would say is a lot of our air and water and other standards are designed to ensure, to protect people and to prevent the development of things like cancer or underlying adverse health effects. Some of them need to be tightened up, and some of them have just completely failed. You all know the horrible story about the Exide lead acid battery plant in Los Angeles that went bankrupt and dumped literally tons of lead. There is no safe level of lead. Lead getting in little kids' brains stays there, and it is damaging. Tons of lead have been exposed into the environment, into schools, into parks and areas of Los Angeles, because one company did not operate consistent with the law, and then promptly went bankrupt and left the community. So these are the failures that we need to look at and learn from. But I also think that the question of preventing things from getting to that point is absolutely critical as well.
And I was thinking about how to respond to that. There are some parallels, I'll just say, in, if you look at the epidemic of vaping. So, ambient pollution from a different source, whether it's the cigarette or the tailpipe. But this is absolutely prevention policy that took place. Also in an environment where where public policy and health recognize that we don't have enough data. We have no idea what are in these devices, but we're very nervous about what the implications are for a whole new generation getting into smoking, where legacies of fights were very successful by and large in some very specific ordinances to have tobacco-free cities, outdoor smoking preventions, airplanes without smoking. So the whole vaping industry came up in a time where research was not ready. But there was enough, I think, vocal support that involved faith community, that involved health, that involved others. And I will say that some of the impediments to the process didn't actually come from the regulators, but they came from local communities. There's some cultural biases around smoking. There are certain barriers about an acceptance, whether you're Jewish, you're Muslim, you're Hispanic, whether you're African American or others. There are certain norms and behaviors, LGBT and kind of bias as well. The gay community smokes more. Well, there's a reason behind that. They were effectively targeted very successfully by industry. So unpacking both at the legislative level with the regulators, but also working very closely with community leaders like yourselves to say, no, this is not okay. We do not want our generation being faced, despite whatever you say the data is or isn't, we intuitively know that something next door to us is wrong, and we're demanding that there's change done. So there's been some good evidence, even with kind of work along the way where we've successfully in coalition made really positive and effective policy prevention decisions. Even right now, looking at sodas, looking at all the vices that are out there that we've come to be, well, it's just a Coke. There's problems that we accept and tolerate, and we just have to decide and really step up and say, this is not okay. This is not something I should tolerate, and then be bold enough to make a change. I'll at least say that there is a track record in California where we've done some very significant and successful prevention policy. And if that's something that a demand is coming, then I know that we will find from amongst us enough leadership to see it through.
If I could just, when Pastor Sauls talked about environmental racism, it brought back a serious memory. I was there that night almost 38 years ago in July in Warren County, North Carolina. We were fighting PCP when Ben Javis, and it almost brings tears to my eyes, stood up and said, this is environmental racism. I didn't have a camera on the phone. I could not record it, but that's how long I've been involved in this too, Dr. Sauls, that I was there when Ben Chavis coined that term, environmental racism, in Warren County, North Carolina.
Wow.
Fighting PCP, a landfill coming into a predominantly Black community, and we were fighting it. And as you know, they had scooped up all the PCP off the highways, and they were getting ready to dump it. They were building a landfill to dump it there, and he came to town.
Yep. I remember that. I wasn't involved, but I do remember that part of history. You are, Pastor Smart. Pastor Sauls, how are you, number one? How you doing? Number two, South Coast and the areas of prevention. We're constantly writing rules that companies and businesses have to abide by, refineries, rules that stop the emissions that are causing the problems in the air. So that's one thing that we do as far as emissions. When that prevention, and then we also do permits. So in order to get a permit for your business, you've got to be in compliance, which means you've got to follow all of our rules. All of your equipment, has to be maintained. We have inspectors that go out on a regular basis to make certain that that is happening. So it's the people that are out of compliance, it's the bad neighbors, the bad actors, we call them, that are causing the problem. So we are involved in prevention, even to the point, and you'll enjoy this, Pastor Sauls. Yesterday, I get a call from one of our inspectors and said, Fabian, I just got 2 complaints from a barbecue place, and I had to issue an NOV, but maybe there's something the small business assistants can help them with. I said, well, what's the name of the place? He said, it's Phillips Barbecue. He said, it's on Crenshaw. I said, don't close my barbecue place down. I'll get small business to call them. They'll call them right now. So that's how, I'm just saying, that's how closely connected to the community that we are. That's how much we care about the community, that an inspector would take the time to call and ask for assistance for this business that he just had to issue an NOV to, because they are barbecuing like crazy. So the smoke is going all over the place. They build a new senior building right next to the barbecue place. So that's who's complaining, because of course the smoke is coming there. So they're getting ready to get a nuisance complaint. But that's what we're doing to be in the prevention stage, is trying to stop it before it happens. So you're absolutely correct. We should all be in the business of trying to do that.
Thank you so much. I'm going to propose, when it's safe to do so, that we all do this down at Phillips for some barbecue. Whenever that's Brown Cheese going to be over barbecue, y'all. Pastor Anderson, over to you.
Thank you. So I just want to follow up on the point that Reverend Sauls and Reverend Thomas raised. Me and my wife, we facilitated the Naomi Klein Take the Leap initiative for the city, which created the Green New Deal in Los Angeles. And one of the tensions that came up was that, traditional environmental activists were concerned about, become carbon neutral. And the Black activists in the room were concerned about environmental racism. And so I'm wondering, when you're talking about prevention, me and my wife moved into a home, right down the street from the oil drilling plant. It's literally like 2 blocks, walk our dog by it every day. And we were so astonished because there's no signage that said, this is an oil drilling plant. There's no signage that says, this is the environmental impact it will have on you if you live near it. And there was nothing in our mailbox to let us know anything of that nature. So I'm wondering, in Sacramento, is there any political will to do something similar to what we've seen in Los Angeles with Mark Thomas, where they passed the anti-racism policy around investigating, are these policies racist and what are the impacts they have on the community? Is there something more we could do around the state where they let us know, hey, you move into a neighborhood and there is an oil drilling plant, and here's how this can affect your life and your air quality, here's how it can impact you. So the community just knows what's going on, and to really investigate the policies that we do pass environmental wise that talks about the health impact and environmental racism, and just call it out at the beginning, similar to what we're going to start doing in LA County. I think that would be very helpful for the neighbors, because I'm not going to lie, majority of people on my street are either Black or Latinx, and they are monolingual. So I don't speak Spanish, so I can't really tell them there's an original plant down the street. My wife does, but I don't, right? So how do we make sure that folks know what they're moving into, their impacts they have in their lives, and then also how do we just, in our laws, call it out at the beginning? Because I saw that as a tension when we were facilitating for the county in creating the Green New Deal. So how do we do that on a state level, and how can churches help and make sure that gets out, that information gets out?
Yeah, great question. Kipper, Eric?
Yeah, I can jump in here really quickly. Excellent questions. I think this is why we're really excited about SB 1000, the way it begins to transform the local planning process. We're looking, the planning process, always you look at existing conditions and then you plan for the future about what needs to change. And a lot of people think that urban planning is just creating new communities out in farmland, but actually the general plan is such a powerful tool where your local electeds, your local planning staffs, the decision makers can begin to daylight information. We haven't done that well around pollution and some of the other environmental justice issues in impacted communities in the state. And we're beginning to transform that discussion. One of the core requirements in SB 1000 is meaningful community engagement, listening to people of color, engaging them in the process, education, but then allowing that process to transform the policy outcomes. And so making sure that some of the information about who is impacted, what are the mapping of those conditions. SB1, as I mentioned earlier, partnering with the air districts, getting cities and counties in your region to partner with the air district to begin to connect the different processes that are going on. We're really just trying to engender that in what planners are doing in the state, and really lifting up people of color and showing those conditions, and then really helping to transform the process and the outcomes that come through planning. So, planning is just planning, but we're really pushing what's in the statute as well around prioritizing actions that meaningfully address those conditions. So it's not just enough to put it in a plan. Plans sit on shelves. Planners pull them down. The community might pull them out the internet and take a look. But what's really meaningful is implementation and seeing actual results through land use decisions, through infrastructure investments, and then partnering with the programs that are being engendered through the agencies that are looking at those standards, the permits that Fabiana has mentioned already today, making sure that that's equitable and those outcomes are affecting change on the ground. One thing that I know Fabian could speak to as well is that air quality monitoring is so needed so people can see those maps, real-time data. We have the technology in our hands, and it's a question of operationalizing that. We're seeing that being implemented now through the AB 617, the Community Air Protection Program work. But AB 617 takes data that used to be sort of hidden and makes it very public. And the goal is to make that transform that and make that available across all of California's impacted communities as we roll that out.
Thank you. Hey, Eric, can you just define really quickly what SB 1000 and AB 1617 are for people that don't live in that world?
Absolutely, yeah. So Senate Bill 1000 was the bill that's passed in 2016 that added environmental justice as a requirement in the general plan for all cities and counties in California. So we have 539 of those local jurisdictions that must have general plans by state law, and those general plans map out the land use future as well as the infrastructure and community services framework that local governments implement. So it's super important that general plan is that foundational, constitutional, if you will, document for land use in a local community.
Who was the author of SB 1000?
And that was Senator Leyva. Mm-hmm.
Kip, anything to add from the legislative perspective? And then I'll go over to Mr. Torres after that.
And then
a couple things. One, go ahead, Fabian.
No,
I learned so much from you. Can I do an eloquent? No, I was going to say, can you do an eloquence transplant on me? Because you are so good at these issues and so knowledgeable. Listening to you, I'm learning. So please go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much. My kids would tell you that I get a lot of practice talking because I love people and I love talking. But Reverend Anderson, also, your real estate agent should have made that disclaimer to you before they sold you that house. That's something that's part of their job to know. I've had real estate agents call me when we were in Paramount doing our toxic investigation there. I've had real estate agents call me about that so that they could tell prospective clients that this was in their neighborhood. So I go back to my real estate agent and ask why she didn't tell me there was an oil well two blocks down, because she should have told you that, or he should have told you that. That was it.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Torres, I think you had a hand up.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry. I think I cut off Kip. I'm so sorry, Mr. Torres. Kip, did I cut you off? Are you about to say something?
No. I'd like to say something, but let Mr. Torres go ahead. I want to hear what you guys have to say, but I do have some information to share when you have a moment.
So you guys talked a lot about regulations and policies to prevent, in some cases, companies that are contaminating the air or the ground or the earth. But in light of the death of George Floyd, and that America has not really dealt with the issue of racism that continues to hurt our communities, and that all this, the roots of racism excluded so many of our communities of color, especially the Black community, from jobs, from education, from health, and these are the consequences of all this stuff and affecting not only the Black community but also other communities of color. In your work, is there anything to do? Is there any part of that that has any option for reparations, for righting the wrong that it has destroyed so many communities of color now, not only with the police issue but the environment issues now? Is there any anything that has to, for example, if people cannot, if there's a factory that's contaminating this in the Long Beach area or Harbor area, and you can't get the factory out of there, is there any plan to maybe help relocate those communities to other housing areas where there's, since you can't move the company or things like that? But is there any reparations being considered to make right all those wrongs that are now affecting our communities of color when it comes to environmental issues?
Not from South Coast.
I would say a couple things. One is reparations is one conversation, but what I will say, and I think Fabian was talked about this, and Eric and others, I think state government and state law and policy increasingly is being changed, both to bring and allow new voices to the table, where not because the laws were discriminatory necessarily, but because they just didn't think about those communities. SB 1000 is a good example. AB 617 is another. AB 617, just so someone asked earlier, what is that? That's the law that basically says, let's put more money and effort into reducing pollution in disadvantaged communities. And as Fabian said, you know, think of the entire South Coast Air Basin, the entire multi-county region of Southern California. Right now, they have 5 communities in that program. We all know that there are hundreds of communities that need that help. So you can see that even though we've fought hard for funding and we have a law that specifically directs attention, not necessarily reparation, but new and focused attention on communities of color and disadvantaged communities, it still isn't nearly enough to be done there. And so we need to stay at this. And frankly, we need ongoing funding. You know, Fabian was very complimentary of the work that we did in the budget to get some money to the South Coast Air District to do this work. I'm grateful for that, but it was a drop in the bucket. It was scraps off the table. It was, what you need is every year, $100, $200, $300 million being appropriated, being made available, and being focused on these communities, and not simply, hey, if we can afford a couple million over here or a couple million over there, we'll figure out a way to do it. So I think also Eric's comments about land use are very much appropriate. Where things are built and how they're built. And like I said, nobody wants a garbage dump. Nobody wants a toxic waste facility. Nobody wants, those kinds of things in their communities. But we all know they tend to end up in the communities of color and the lower income communities. You don't see those things in other communities that are more affluent. And that's part of the land use decision-making process that needs to be taken into account.
Thank you so much. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We've got 10 more minutes. I actually have a question for all of the faith leaders on this conversation. And I know some of you also have your hands raised, so feel free to ask your question as well. I'm curious about, what you and your congregations are doing to help the, parents and families and young people in your churches deal with the concerns they have and questions and the need for advocacy about their own health and the health of their communities. Either what advice do you have on what we can be doing on their behalf, or are there outreach programs or other things that you're already doing through your churches or things you'd like to see? There's so much good work that is already going on out of our houses of worship here in Southern California and statewide. So I'd like to hear if you have ideas, suggestions of what should be happening, or further questions. We've got 10 more minutes.
Can Walter Contreras, who's a chairman of one of the largest Christian Latino organizations in the country, can he speak on that, Brother Contreras? Can you, Pastor Contreras?
Yes. My name is Walter Contreras. I'm the vice president of NALEC, National Latino Evangelical Coalition. We we influence over 8 million of our Hispanic leaders. Just want to mention the fact that I always have this saying. I say that in California and many other places too, if you're not bilingual and bicultural, you will be by yourselves. In the sense that we are growing so much, we have 24 subcultures of Latinos. That is a lot of subcultures. And it's not enough just to speak English, it's to speak Spanish and to do some flyers and bilingual, but it takes the power to be able to put into your budget and into your personnel people who can communicate not only bilingually but biculturally when you do your community engagement. And it's very, very important. Most of our conversations that we had today, I'm so happy we're having it, but I don't see many of the Latinos or the brown people involved. And I will say in the churches too, because there's a lack of the right community engagement that will speak to them, not only bilingually, but also biculturally. There's a lot of cultural issues that we have to, so to be able to have access into many of those populations of people, we must be able to define that reality and be able to create natural pathways for us to be able to train people, to build capacity, and to really raise up ambassadors on these issues so that they can really make an impact among the Latino community.
Thank you so much. We had Pastor Jean-Marie and then Pastor Thomas also had their hands raised. So if you have any comments or questions.
Yes, Pastor Jean-Marie, yes, thank you. You actually said my name better than most, so that's pretty cool. I didn't really have a question, but I wanted to speak to this issue of funding, and that I pastored a church without walls in Skid Row for the past 14 years, and part of clergy for Black Lives. And one of the reasons we have been calling for defunding the police, and a lot of times people get all, worked up when we talk about defunding the police. And this is precisely why, right? We're talking about funding, we're talking about we don't have funding, we're talking about environmental racism, we're talking about all of these issues, and yet we continue to pour a truckload of resources into policing. And so when we talk about defunding the police, that's precisely what we're talking about. We're talking about divesting from policing and investing into our communities. Because pretty soon, with all the policing, we're not going to be able to afford the pension for all those police officers anyway, right, as a society. So we've got to reimagine public safety. And this conversation is part of that reimagining. And that's part of where we need to get some of those resources.
So, Pastor, we like to call it resourcing, not defunding the police. We like to call it resourcing because defunding scares white folks when you say that. Because they think we get rid of the police.
Yeah,
we're not getting rid of the police.
Right. I understand that, but understand that without the movement that's happening, folks would not be scared. And we need both. We need Malcolm and we need Martin. And we need to continue to scare them on the street so that they understand that we're serious, with all due respect. Thank you.
I wanted to add something to your question. As far as what I would, Pastor Smart, thank you, and also the folks, the people who have spoken and addressing us to this forum. I know I did a presentation in Wilmington one time. In Wilmington, where there's a lot of issue with the ships and the contamination there next to Long Beach. And there was 50 agencies there, nonprofits in Wilmington, because I'm part of the United Wilmington Church in Wilmington. And I was invited to speak on immigration to these 50 nonprofits. I would also like to suggest that we also invite them to this discussion because some of those agencies work in environmental justice in the Harbor Long Beach area, right? Because it's very important to have that voice. When we're talking about policy, have that voice of those who have been there on the ground advocating on this issue.
And in Wilmington too, yeah.
And that those voices of those people who have suffered be on this space, that their voice be also on this space also. not just us as state community leaders. Their voice has to be also here. So that's one of the suggestions that I have. Because when I spoke there was 50 agencies, nonprofits in Wilmington that I didn't even know about, because most of my work had been in Long Beach. But since I was part of the United District, 50 agencies, and some of them were talking about the environmental issues for the trucks and the ships and the containers and stuff like that. So I think their voice, if we're going to talk about policy and moving on, that their voice has to be in this space in the future.
Oh, Mr. Torres, I'd like to talk to you because one of our communities is Wilmington, West Long Beach, and Carson. So we certainly would like to invite them to our AB 617 meetings for that community, because they're public meetings, okay? Excuse me.
Listen, and you know, with full disclosure, and I want to, I hope I say this right. You know, yes, I am a pastor, but I also have a degree in public policy. And so the reason that I mention that is that somebody touched on this. I think it was Pastor Walter. You know, one of the big issues with public policy, number one, there are very few people who look like me who actually work in the profession of, in the public policy era. And you may have folks who do this at the nonprofit level, but very, very few folks come out of school, black and brown alike, with doctorates in public policy. It's just like an anomaly almost. But for me particularly, I haven't really been able to operate in the field the way that I would like to, because my perspective is so different. And let me just give you an example. And so I've retreated to the university. And so for example, if I know, and we're talking about informing the community, and let's be very clear, you know, from the ground, much of the community agrees with the tactics of Black Lives Matter and other groups, right? And so if we inform the community that there is a plant that's killing us, that refuses to monitor itself and refuses to comply, if the community is educated at the level that we would like them to be, guess what? Ms. Weston, your job will be done very easily, because the community will close that plant down. And so, you know, I think that becomes a very, very important component. And I think someone said, I think it was Kip who said, that a lot of these communities were not taken into consideration when these policies were made. And so so we keep kind of doing the same things over and over in different ways. There needs to be, you know, a diversity of voices, not at just the nonprofit level, because nonprofits get funding from governments, and often their agenda is the government's agenda. You know, but there has to be a way to really introduce the voices of people on the ground. And I'm not suggesting that just be through nonprofits. I mean, that certainly is one way, but, you know, I'm not suggesting, because oftentimes, you know, and I've led 2 social justice nonprofits that were problematic for me, because we were just repeating the elected officials' mantra. And so there, you know, so how can we begin to rethink this? You know, how can we tell students, you know, major in public policy, particularly if you're Black or brown, and then just know that you're, you know, and this is no disrespect to anybody, but just know that you won't really be able to work on policy that will make the significant and radical change that you want to see in your communities, because that's ultimately what I have had to accept if I'm going to work in the field of public policy. So I'm just wanting to know, I guess my question is, you know, how can we build that in as a grassroots effort, you know, in a real partnership, so that these communities aren't used to be, you know, the kinder and gentler mouthpiece of elected officials?
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Thomas. And I want to have our speakers maybe wrap a response to that into some closing remarks, because we're at time. But Eric, I'll go to you first.
Thank you so much. It's such a wonderful set of statements and question there. I do want to report that, at least at the state level, I know some of my colleagues, including my own significant other who works for an elected official in local government here in our region, we're participating now through something called the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, the GARE program. And at the state level, that now has a new name called the Capital Collaborative for on Race and Equity, CCORE. These programs are super important for addressing what you just raised, which is the need to really transform government itself. If we're not rooting out the lack of diversity, the lack of inclusion, the lack of sensitivity, and the lack of ability to even collaborate and empower with people of color, we're spinning our wheels. And we're not owning the problem of white supremacy and the historic injustice, right? We need to transform. Here at OPR, SGC, the two agencies that I'm in our office that works kitty corner from the Capitol, we are intentionally diving into a process now to go through a learning year and create racial equity action plans for our organization, so that we're not just talking about hiring practices, but we're talking about transforming the way that we do our work. So I would just want to speak to that. That's one specific action that we're taking, but it is really just the beginning. And so just acknowledging that, and we're hoping that local governments, other agencies, maybe the South Coast District is doing a similar process, that really begins to transform what we really mean and talk about around equity and justice as far as race and equity are concerned in the governance work we do.
Thank you. If I can go to maybe Kip and then Dan and then Fabian and Pastor Smart to close us out. So Kip, any closing thoughts?
Sorry about that, I was on mute. Let me start by saying thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. I didn't really fully appreciate how exceptional this conversation was going to be. So, and as I say, I tend to want to listen and learn rather than talk. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank the other people on here, the pastors, the faith community, my friend, Ms. Wesson, Eric for his comment. I mean, you guys are amazing. And it's great. You know, I kind of sit here in Sacramento and work on these issues, but the energy and the knowledge and the commitment that exists on this webinar and with this call is really inspiring. And I do think I know people always say these kinds of things, but I do think we're at a moment in time on a lot of these issues, not just because of COVID, but because of Black Lives Matter. And because I think in California, our communities are finally waking up the rest of the state to some of these issues in ways that are very good. And your representatives in the state capitol are listening and paying attention. And we won't win every fight and we won't lose every fight, and it's a constant struggle. But I just want to say I am grateful, and I want to thank you for including me in this discussion, and I hope you'll include me in future discussions. So that's my remarks.
Absolutely, Kip, always welcome. Dan?
Yeah, to echo Kip's remarks, just thanking everybody for the opportunity to share today and to be part of this conversation that is absolutely ongoing. Certainly, you know, we can affect what we can measure, and the perspective that I know that we do take, that I do take in leadership, is really looking at composition. And so you're talking at what you say, totally rang true about working in public policy. We have a research campaign focused on women in research specifically because there's a major problem nationally with not enough women in certain fields, and there's no pipeline. And the same can be true if you look, are there enough African Americans in positions of authority and leadership, Latinx and others? And so we have to be very mindful and purposeful and measure what we're doing. And we're absolutely doing that here. And the second thing is just the humility behind the whole concept of health equity and racism, going into communities, working together, not from a position of authority where here's everything you need to do. But a lot of work that we've done is to just ask. I recognize that there's a problem. The problem wouldn't exist if what we thought we were doing worked for everyone. Where did we miss? And asking the questions. And some of it could be, norms and things like that. We don't know, is the point. And so, absolutely working across the aisle and inter-community and partnering between government, corporate, private sector, at a highly localized level. That's really where we look. And I think what we're seeing today really is representative of that. People care about what is in their backyard. We kind of joke about the NIMBYism, but at the end of the day, people can react to what they can see and who they talk to, and imagine the COVID environment and how that's affected who we interact with, even within our own, whatever we call our workplace nowadays. So it does, being intentional, taking the extra steps and the humility involved is really what will actually drive effective policy and make the changes that we're all trying to see, and appreciating everybody. And please know that we're available, as are a lot of our colleagues, and that we do work together when we can to drive solutions, because we don't want to work independently in 17 different directions that happen to converge from time to time. We want to also be intentional about the collaboration. So thanks again for your time.
Thanks so much, Dan. Fabian?
Forgot I was on mute. I again want to thank you, Pastor Smart and Jamara, for doing this. This has been fabulous, enlightening for me. A lot of it you know, but to hear it from different perspectives makes it even more profound. We at South Coast recognize Black Lives Matter. We recognize, and you said it, Pastor Smart, the moment. This is a moment in time that we need to seize upon and make something out of it. We at South Coast wanted to share and show unity with Black Lives Matter in the community. And it came up that, you know, there's some systematic racism going on right here at South Coast. Maybe we need to address that. And surprisingly enough, the executive officer said, "You're right." Oh, I didn't say that. Said, "That's right." Said, "That's right." And they have now launched a diversity panel, which is inclusion, diversity, and equity. That will address these hiring practices. And to you, Mr. Thomas, I'm going to throw it back at you. You need to expose folk to what you do. You need to work with groups that have youngsters and give those kids exposure about public policy. Because I'm an adult and I had to ask, babe, and you know what I'm talking about, what's public policy? I didn't know what it was. So, you know, work with sororities and fraternities and youth community centers and youth groups. Go out and give talks about what you do. The more we are, there's number and powers, they'll listen. So I'll say that. And then I'll also say that, you know, we have an environmental justice conference coming up. And within that conference, we have a Black Lives Matter panel. We also have a panel on the effects of COVID-19 on indigenous tribes. Okay, that's a hard word for me. But so we're trying to cover a lot of these aspects. I love that. Bilingual, bicultural, or by yourself. That's what we're about. I love that. I love that. So I would love to see this. I'd love to see a 2-hour conversation, because an hour and a half is not enough, not nearly enough. And I'd love to see this repeated. So thank you. Thank you all for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fabian, for everything that you do. And Pastor Smart, the biggest thank you to you for causing this conversation to happen today. So any thoughts to take us out with?
Yeah, thank you, Jamara, for your great leading us through everything today. So thank you so much. And I think the next steps for us is we don't need too much more conversations. We need some action. And even on one of the things I did, I downloaded the South Coast so I could see the air quality every day. But now we need to make sure that going forward, like we know about all of these programs with resources. I'm going to get with she's behind everything here. Lindsay, I'm gonna get with Lindsay and we're gonna come forward of a set of where we go from here. But we wanna make sure all of these resources have been identified, that they're getting out there, that we wanna see Black and brown people getting these electric cars. We want them to see getting gas burners, getting lawnmowers. We want access to resources for our people. That's important because that attenuates the environmental racism and environmental that attenuates the smog. Let me for a better word. It attenuates the pollution. Okay, we're ready to go. We're ready. You see, many of us are members of clergy for Black Lives. We're also part of the Baptist ministers and other groups that was here. Our Latino brothers and sisters were here. We're ready to go. We have a coalition. We want to work with you. But now let me tell you, you heard from our people. You got to come correct because our people are struggling out there. but we'll be with you. We'll work hand in hand in the righteous way. God bless you.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here. Dan and Eric and Kip, thank you so much for spending your time. Pastor Smart, this is so critical and we are just getting started. So thank you all so much. Have a blessed day. Be safe out there and stay home. Thanks.
Bye-bye.